Thanks very much, and hello everybody. This is Glenn McGovery, Managing Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We really appreciate it, and thanks so much to our speakers. We're very fortunate to have with us today Keri Martens. Kerri is the Deputy Fire Chief for Canmore, Alberta Fire Rescue. And we also have Stu Walkinshaw. Stu is owner-operator of Montane Forest Management based out of Canmore as well. And we're going to basically take a look at Canmore as a case study of what can be done and what should be done in the face of wildland urban interface fire events. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our speakers, and please feel free to ask questions to the Q&A, and we'll deal with those at the end of the presentation.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Glenn, for this opportunity today. I know Stu and I have both been really looking forward to it. So we'll get started right away. To start, I would like to do a brief land acknowledgement. So the town of Canmore is located on the traditional home to Treaty 7 territories, home to the Stoney Nakoda, Blackfoot, and Tsuut'ina nations, as well as Zone 3 Métis. We acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, and play, and help us steward this land and honor and celebrate this territory. So the town of Canmore is located in the Bow Valley area of southwestern Alberta, adjacent to Banff National Park and several Alberta provincial parks. We are 100 kilometers west of Calgary along the Trans-Canada Highway. Development began here in the late 1880s, but it really wasn't until the 1980s when Calgary hosted the Winter Olympics, that significant residential and commercial development began. While a census has not been done recently, we estimate the current population at about 15,000 people. So in addition to its location adjacent to national and provincial parklands, there are also large portions of parkland within the town boundary itself. The town boundary is highlighted in yellow here on this map. Most of this land is covered by coniferous forest. For years, the town of Canmore has worked closely with the Alberta government. The town has worked in conjunction with the province on FireSmart-based vegetation management and operations on the provincial lands within the town boundary. A mutual aid agreement is in place for any necessary response action on these lands as well. Canmore is in the wildland urban interface, as you can see. We are surrounded on all sides. All this forest is one of the reasons people move here. And as Stu points out, it's not as natural as they may think.
So with that, I'll give a brief overview of the wildfire regime within the Bow Valley. And what I really wanted to speak to was the fact that the Bow Valley has grown up with wildfire over centuries and centuries. Post-1940, fire exclusion has stretched our fire cycles throughout the Bow Valley. And I think the other important point to remember is that, as Kerri had mentioned, since the 1988 Olympics, development in the town of Canmore has increased exponentially and has created somewhat of a wildland urban interface hazard throughout the town of Canmore. And you can see the early 1900s photo on the left-hand side. You can see the present day photo on the right-hand side. And one of the points that Kerri was referring to is that we often hear the comment from people that, no, we want it to remain natural, like it is right now. And I think a key point that we need to make sure we drive home to everybody is that what we see in present day is not natural. And that's something that we need to ensure we drive home in our public education. If we take a look at a little bit of the age class in the valley right now, you can see the majority of the valley is orange or red. So we're basically looking at 110 to 150, 200 years of age in the Bow Valley, town of Canmore area. Up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that historic fire return intervals were between 23 and 77 years, depending on what side of the valley you were on. And on south-facing slopes in particular, fire return interval somewhere between 13 and 43 years. So when you look at that age class map and you're seeing that we're 110 to 200 years of age, you can see that we have interrupted, the historic fire regime in the valley. As a result of that, this is the current wildfire behavior potential map that is being used within the town of Canmore in FireSmart planning. Red and orange are bad, and you can see we've got lots of red and orange. All of those older age class coniferous pine and spruce stands are ranked as higher extreme, and we have significant wildfire behavior potential within the Bow Valley. And what that's done then is those increased wildland fuel loads that have come from the fire exclusion and that exponential development in the valley since the 1980s has resulted in extreme wildland urban interface threat. So I just wanted to really quickly go through some FireSmart basics. And I wanted to talk about how structures ignite. We all think it's that big wall of flame that comes through and just wipes out houses. It really isn't. It's embers or firebrands that take out most houses. Then you have direct flame contact, and then you have radiant heat ignition. So those are the three main ways that structures get ignited from wildfire. A couple of lessons learned that we are using here in the town of Canmore to drive the FireSmart direction that we're going. The first one is that 80 to 90% of homes that are destroyed by wildfires are ignited by embers, not by the tsunami or the wall of flame that comes into town. And the second lesson learned is that 85 to 90% of homes with non-flammable roofs and 10 meters of clearance will survive a major wildfire. And at the bottom in bright blue, a quote that comes from Jack Cohen: "If homes don't ignite, homes don't burn." And that's a lesson to live by in FireSmart planning for a community. So where we end up then is, what has the town of Canmore done to deal with the wildland urban interface threat that we face? And those lessons learned that I just spoke to lead us to where the town is going. And the first one is to reduce the ignitability of the home. And the second direction is to reduce the wildfire intensity and rate of spread as it approaches the home, the neighborhood, or the community, or all three of the above. So the first thing to talk about is what drives the accomplishments that the town of Canmore has achieved so far. And the first one is FireSmart planning. Town of Canmore was one of the first towns in Alberta to develop and implement a FireSmart plan. And they did that back in 1999, 2000. From there, they updated the plan in 2010 and once again in 2018, based on the accomplishments that they had achieved and the new development in town, that had occurred since each of those plans was built. And those plans, first of all, look at or complete a wildfire hazard assessment, as you can see on the map on the right-hand side. And that then leads where the FireSmart mitigation options need to occur. And those mitigation options are based on the 7 disciplines of wildland-urban interface approach. So each one of those plans includes options for vegetation management, development, legislation, public education, interagency cooperation, cross-training, and emergency planning. So we'll speak to each of those 7 disciplines over the next little bit here now. And I'll start with vegetation management, and then we'll turn it over to Kerri. So from a veg management perspective, you can see the town of Canmore boundary in yellow. You can see the patches of orange throughout this image up on the screen. All of those are existing vegetation management blocks that have been completed and are now being maintained on a regular basis. So if we take a look at some of the details in there, it's being completed both at the landscape and at the community level by the provincial government, the federal government, the town of Canmore, and that's about 525 hectares of landscape level veg management. In the top left-hand corner of the screen, you can see a 2-kilometer wide fuel break there on the Banff National Park boundary. If we move down to community level, those orange blocks that you see right in the middle of the town of Canmore, those are being done on both town lands, on provincial lands within the town, and by private developers. And there's about 200 hectares that have been thinned, pruned, and cleaned in those areas. And then the last one is structure level veg management, and I'll speak to that in just a minute. So here's a photo of the 2-kilometer wide fuel break on the Banff National Park boundary. And you can see what's called the Carrot Creek fuel break right here in the center of the photo. And you can see what's called the Canmore Nordic Center West fuel break on the north-facing slope on the provincial side. Everything in behind here towards the bottom of the screen has been prescribed burned back in 2003 and basically all the way back to the town of Banff for about 15 kilometers. So it's a significant fuel break on the edge of the town of Canmore. If we move into the community level vegetation management, it's been about 200 hectares completed on both town municipal reserve, environmental reserve lands, on provincial crown lands that the town has implemented on behalf of the provincial government, and by private developers, as I was saying earlier, around some of the new developments in town. And the last one is that structure level vegetation management. If structures don't ignite, structures don't burn. That's a key concept to keep in mind. And it's the concept that we're now trying to drive home to homeowners and business owners within the town of Canmore. And with that, I'll move it over to Kerri and the public education piece.
Sure, thanks, Stu. Okay, so obviously public education plays a really, really important role in all of this activity. It's a key component to any mitigation program, and it's a big part of the work that Canmore Fire and the town is currently doing within the community. So a couple of years ago, we started hosting FireSmart Forums. So we were able to host a FireSmart Forum in 2018 and again in 2019. Unfortunately, we were not able to do one in 2020 for some reason that we may or may not want to talk about. But FireSmart Forums have been a really successful way of communicating the hazard risk that the residents in Canmore face. The residents' feedback we've gotten from residents is that they really like the community atmosphere that it provides. So, you know, hopefully we will be able to host another one later this year. That's currently our plan. So FireSmart home inspections are also an option that we've been working on. Since we started those, we started them late in 2018 and really didn't get many of them done until 2019. Again, last year we were not able to accomplish very many, but we have done 40 home assessments to date. Most of those were in the 2019 summer season. They're offered free of charge to community residents. All they have to do is contact the fire department, and we send one of our duty crews over to perform the assessment and have a conversation with the homeowner. We've found doing these that in many cases, the residents have done a lot of their own research and are already fairly well informed about what we're there to discuss and what we are there to point out to them. So for Canmore Fire, it continues to be important that residents see us as community participants outside of the bad times. So these assessments have been a really great way to get our department into the community, to meet with residents and to really further enhance those community relationships. In addition, we use the Town of Canmore website regularly to post FireSmart information and vegetation management work and plans. And several times a year, we use that same website to remind residents of the FireSmart initiatives that they can undertake to reduce their residential risk. Great. So as far as development and legislation goes, in 1999, the town adopted a land use bylaw that took into account a wildfire risk assessment. And as a result of that assessment, a fire-rated roofing material regulation was introduced into the land use bylaw. And we think that Canmore may have been the first community in Alberta to do so. So as roofs are replaced and new construction is built, fire-rated roofing materials must be used. Between 2008 between the years 2011 to 2018, we've seen a reduction of 233 combustible roofs in town. So that's a good success indicator. In 2020, the land use bylaw was reviewed and a 1.5 meter FireSmart non-combustible zone requirement was included. And also in 2020, the engineering, design, and construction standards were updated and also include access designs to meet NFPA 1141, which is the standard for fire protection infrastructure for land development in wildland, rural, and suburban areas. Also, the underground installation of power lines, along with some FireSmart landscaping requirements.
So moving on to interagency cooperation and cross-training, 2 of the 7 wildland-urban interface disciplines. The town of Canmore, as Kerri had mentioned, holds agreements with all of their adjacent municipal response partners for response throughout the Bow Valley. Town of Banff Fire Department, MD of Bighorn, Kananaskis Country. And they also train together on a regular basis for wildland urban interface community protection. The town has held multiple field, functional, and tabletop wildland urban interface exercises. The first one starting back in 2004, it was a full-on field exercise where there was a fire coming down the valley towards one of the neighborhoods in town. Alberta Forestry responded with rappel crews, with air tankers, fire trucks, sprinklers. A mock evacuation was held. It was a full-on exercise, as well as the public was invited to watch and to collect and gain a whole bunch of FireSmart information that they could take back to their own homes. So that was the start of the Wildland Urban Interface exercises, and they have continued ever since, both in a functional tabletop processes. In terms of cross-training, it's too numerous to mention all the different cross-training days and events that have occurred. But both the Town of Canmore emergency management staff and Canmore Fire Rescue staff are trained to incident command system standards so that they can work in coordination with all of their partners, Alberta Wildfire Management, Banff, MD of Bighorn, a common emergency management system that everybody can use on an incident. The fire department is also, or has taken the structure and site preparation workshop, or S115. They have done the fire operations in the Wildland Urban Interface training, S215, and they have completed several wildland firefighter, NFPA 1051 courses over the last 20 years. So some significant training and recurring training on a regular basis, which is great to see. The last discipline that we wanted to speak to, emergency response planning. Emergency response planning for a wildland urban interface fire is key to successful fire operations during an interface event. I think most of you probably know that most wildland urban interface fires occur under extreme conditions, hot, dry, and the winds are typically blowing. And there isn't a lot of time to take the actions that are required to protect life and property. On the left-hand side, you can see that the town has a wildfire pre-plan that they have had for many years now and have updated regularly. And that pre-plan provides all of the necessary strategic and tactical actions that are required during a wildland urban interface fire. It provides the hazards to the firefighters, staging area locations, resources required, communications plan, water supply locations, and on the bottom of that table that you can see, all of the values at risk broken up by neighborhoods, the number of structures with combustible or fire-rated roofing materials, and then all of the strategies and the tactics that may be helpful in protecting that particular neighborhood from a wildland urban interface fire. And on the right-hand side, as a result of that pre-plan, it was identified that there was the need to have some equipment to actually protect those neighborhoods or structures from a wildfire. So the Town of Canmore last year received the funding from Town Council and built themselves a structure protection unit that you can see in the top right-hand photo there. And that structure protection unit is outfitted with all of the necessary equipment, from pumps to hose to sprinklers to ladders to relay tanks to protect the values at risk from an advancing wildfire. The last point that I just wanted to make on emergency response planning is that the town's municipal emergency management plan, which is an all hazards plan, was updated several years ago to an incident command system model, for the same reason that all of the responders are taking ICS, or incident command system training. The overarching municipal emergency management plan has also been revised to reflect the new emergency management system that the town of Canmore will be using.
All right, so yeah, so all of that kind of gets us close to the end here, where we've had a lot of success with our programming and with our planning and the work so far, but that doesn't mean that there's not more work to do. There will always be more work to do, right? So as far as success goes, the town has been working towards a FireSmart community for more than 20 years now. There's been a lot of success since the implementation of the FireSmart initiatives and its continual process, or sorry, it is a continual process. We've had the support of the elected officials, administration, and of the community itself, which I think is key. To have the buy-in that we have is really key to the success of our programming. In 2019, we were honored to accept a FireSmart Community Protection Achievement Award from Laura Stewart with FireSmart Canada. And so, really, we've seen success across all 7 disciplines, and the town looks forward to continuing the work within the FireSmart program to reduce the wildfire threat that exists to property in the town of Canmore.
Thank you very much.
Hi, that was great. Thank you, Stu and Kerri. Does that wrap up your presentation?
Yes.
It does.
Okay, so we're going to move over to the Q&A. So I'd like to invite anybody listening in right now to use the Q&A function at the bottom right hand of your screen to post some questions. And I'm going to start things off as I normally do. So Stu, in that very early photo that you showed of Canmore in 1900, then again at present day, I found it very interesting to see that the forest seems to be denser now than it was back then. You would think that with development would have been the other way around, but it seems that the forest is denser now than it was 100 years ago. I wonder if you can explain the concept of fire exclusion and what you mean by that. It's a little bit of lingo. Some of our listeners may not understand what you mean by fire exclusion.
Sure. 2 separate things. The first one being that the wildland fire agencies in today's day and age across Canada are very good at putting fires out. We have great trained fire crews. We have lots of equipment, air tankers, heavy equipment, all of the tools. So we're very efficient at putting fires out very quickly. The other point about fire exclusion is that pre-1940, we used to have lots of fire on the landscape that was anthropogenically caused. Our First Nations communities would use fire across the landscape all the time to improve wildlife habitat, to open up areas for various different reasons. We started to stop that simply from a fire prevention perspective. So we've both prevented anthropogenically caused fires, and we've become very good at putting out fires at the same time. Therefore, we have the picture on the right-hand side that shows a whole carpet of green rather than what we see pre-1940s. That was very much a landscape that we used to see in the Bow Valley.
Right. And I think with that is that the confusion that fire is bad, right? All fire is bad, and we've kind of been raised with that concept that fire does no good. But we have to understand, I think, the purpose of fire and the role that fire plays on in the natural environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, obviously fire is bad if it's right next to the community. But by the same token, fire is good in areas where it's not threatening the community.
Right. So we have a question here. In terms of combustible roof replacements, was there ever an incentive of any kind provided by the town, province, or federal government?
Do you want to do that one, Kerri, or me?
You can, yeah, no, go ahead with that one. You had a little bit more experience with the implementation of that.
Okay, so the answer to that is no. There is no incentives in place in the town of Canmore or from the Alberta provincial government. It's interesting to note that the town of Banff has actually started a combustible roof replacement incentive program. I'm not sure how well it's gone at this point, but they kicked it off, I think, a year or maybe 2 years ago now.
Do you have any details on that incentive that they're providing?
I don't, no.
No, I know they do have it capped at a certain amount, but I don't have any other details, no.
Interesting. So kind of hand in hand with this question is another similar question. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the bylaw that makes those roofs required, and is the bylaw enforced, and is there any inspection before each wildfire season?
So the bylaw is comes with at the development permit stage. So if someone in town is replacing a roof, they have to apply for a development permit, and that's where, so historically that's where changes are being enforced. For any new construction, it's just part of the new construction build process is that they have to agree to use a non-combustible or a fire rated roofing rather. Sorry, does that?
Yeah, my internet connection is fading in and out, and so sometimes the audio gets cut out, and I'm not sure if it's you stopping talking or if it's my connection.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Another question with vegetation areas, do you recommend that they be removed from the hazard analysis for ember transport and radiant heat exposure, or for how long? And for how long?
And sorry, Glenn, you broke up there this time. Can you say that again?
So with respect to treated vegetation areas, do you recommend that they be removed from the hazard analysis for ember transport and radiant heat exposure, and for how long?
So what we've done here is I have in the fire behavior potential map, we have taken all of the treated areas and looked at them individually and said, this has been taken from an extreme wildfire behavior potential to a high or a moderate or a low potential. And so each one of them gets ranked based on the current standard. And the question about how long would we state that it meets that. In the Bow Valley, we have very slow growth in our fuel modified areas. So it lasts for quite some time, and we haven't gotten to a point yet where we need to say it's gone back up a class. Did I answer that question for what you were looking for there?
Yeah, I think so. The person asking the question, if they're not satisfied, they can probably maybe mention that in the Q&A. Next question, what sort of ecological survey was done prior to the clearing of the fire break zone?
I would assume that the question refers to the 2 kilometer wide break at the Banff National Park boundary. So the break that was done on the Banff National Park side went through a fairly rigorous environmental assessment process. I can't speak to how rigorous that was, but I know Parks Canada has a very rigorous process. On the provincial side, it was less of an environmental impact assessment process, but it was worked through Alberta provincial parks because it was on their land and they put it through their environmental impact assessment process.
Okay. So with that, there's a question that kind of goes hand in hand with this. Does Canmore have agreements in place with the federal government since you're so close to Banff National Park for prevention and response?
We do. We have there is a mutual aid agreement that exists for this entire region. So that is one way that that we could work on any sort of joint response actions. And as far as planning goes, we do work in conjunction with Banff National Park and their fire management program and managers as we look at building further fuel modification programs. We do converse with Banff National Park. Yes.
I think another important thing that I'll just bring up, Kerri, as well,
yeah,
in response to that one, is that from a wildfire response perspective, everything within the yellow boundary of the town of Canmore is excluded from the forest protection area of Alberta. So all of those forested or urban developed areas within that yellow boundary, wildfire response is the responsibility of the town of Canmore. Even if it's provincial land out there. Now, I'll put a little bit of a caveat on that, in that I think it's important for everybody to understand that forestry would be here in an instant if there was a fire on the provincial land. As a matter of fact, they'd probably be here in an instant, even if it wasn't on provincial land within the town of Canmore, because they are very much paying attention to the Bow Valley. The lands within Banff National Park, all wildfire jurisdiction is with Parks Canada, and they have significant resources at Banff for that. And then all of the lands in the MD of Bighorn and the Kananaskis Improvement District that surround the town of Canmore are within the forest protection area of Alberta and are the responsibility of Alberta Wildfire Management.
Okay. Regarding the assessments that are done on individual structures, are these performed on commercial structures as well?
They certainly can be. We have made them available to any resident in Canmore. So, really all they have to do is contact us here at the hall, and we set some times up for them.
Somebody asked here if the United States has an equivalent to the FireSmart rating system, and I would say that the US does have FireWise. I'm not overly familiar with it, but FireSmart is derived from NFIP's FireWise. I'm not sure if you, Stu, or Kerri, can add anything to that.
Yes, they do. There's multiple different assessment systems out there. But yes, FireWise and the NFPA do have structure assessments. And just as a point of note as well, FireSmart Alberta in cooperation with FireSmart Canada, is in the process right now of revising what's called the initial FireSmart Home Assessment app or program. And it's going to be a simplified assessment program that should be launched quite soon.
Excellent. So ICLR Executive Director Paul Kovacs offers his congratulations to Canmore, and he notes that Canmore has earned its reputation as the leader in Canada in wildfire community protection. His question is, why is it important that the initiative in Canmore is based on a rigorous risk assessment, an assessment that you have updated and then updated again?
I think the main point there is that conditions change. Through the last 20 years, when we have seen significant development, some of that development has been built with less than solid FireSmart standards in place. So, a new neighborhood then needs to be identified as an at-risk neighborhood. And other neighborhoods have been built very close to FireSmart standards. So the updated hazard assessment gives the Town of Canmore personnel priorities of places to focus their efforts on. I just want to go back and just make sure that everybody understands that in today's day and age, so the new neighborhoods that were built 20 years ago may have not followed complete FireSmart standards, but it's really interesting to watch these days with the new land use bylaw and the new engineering design and construction standards and the attention that the Town of Canmore is paying to FireSmart, and the requirement for wildfire risk assessments prior to getting subdivision approval. There is a great amount of progress in developing FireSmart communities at the outset rather than later on down the road. So hats off is, I guess, the key message.
Absolutely. So Canmore was the first community in Alberta to require fire resilient roofs on new homes. How are you approaching fire resilient roofs for existing homes?
Yeah, good question. So really, I mean, we're not in a position where we're going out and making people replace their roofing materials. It's really just, when it comes time for a homeowner to replace their roof, and they go through the development process, the development permit process, that's where they're getting the information and the direction to use fire rated materials instead.
Interesting. Here's an interesting one. I'm in Iridium Hot Springs, and I have been trying to get our second home residents to buy into FireSmart ideas, but there seems to be resistance as the homes are their second homes. They always have a place to go, and their comments are, that's why we have insurance. Do you have this issue, and how do you overcome it?
All the time? Yes. I have heard hundreds of times over the last 2 decades, I have insurance. I'm not sure that there is a solution to that. I think at some point we need to understand that some people are going to want to make some changes and some just definitely aren't. And public education is about the only way in trying, you try to get people to understand what the issues are and what the losses will be when and if it happens. But I understand the issue, and sometimes I just don't think there's a solution for it.
Yeah, and I think just to add real quick, there is value in having neighbors talk to neighbors. It's still not an ultimate solution perhaps, but we've come across that question as we go out and do our home assessments, and you know, really the only advice we can give is to start those neighborhood conversations and lean over the back fence and have a conversation with your neighbor, and you know, educate and inform, and you know, you never know, you might have some success.
Yeah, I think that's key because, you know, you can make your own property FireSmart. You can FireSmart as much as you want, but if your neighbors don't do it, you're at risk from your neighbor's home burning and perhaps catching your property on fire. So it's, I think that's really key.
And I think just one other comment that you guys both tweaked in my head here that I think is a great solution for the person asking the question is go on to the FireSmart Canada website and take a look at the FireSmart Canada Neighborhood Recognition Program. And so, as Kerri was saying, you know, if neighbors talk to neighbors, you get a lot of success that way. And this FireSmart Canada Neighborhood Recognition Program gets all of the neighbors together, and it engages them to take responsibility for their neighborhood. And I would highly recommend that as maybe a possible solution to the question.
Great. Has the information on risk mitigation and preparation been submitted to Fire Underwriter Survey so insurers can see the info in the Wildfire Grading Index and take that into account when they underwrite risk? So is Canmore sharing all these activities with the Fire Underwriter Survey?
So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussion about the FUS survey here in Canmore, and you know, without a lot of the other detail, the town is currently in the process of making contact with fire underwriters to start that process with them.
Have you found that as town council has changed, the view, the outlook on wildfire has changed over the years? Do you have any challenges with, you know, how a new council will view the risk and what's being done about it? Do you have to start over with your arguments every time council changes?
Stu, you might have a little more long-term experience there.
Well, are you saying I'm older than you? So in answer to that question, I would suggest that no, it has not been a problem. Council has been very supportive since this started 20 some odd years ago. I think the other key points that we see is that not all of council changes at the same time. So there are always some folks that come from the previous council into the new council. And I think the other key point is that FireSmart is on the radar screen across Canada these days. And Slave Lake, Fort McMurray, Kelowna, BC in 2017 have all raised it to a level where everybody understands it. And I have seen nothing but support from town council.
Excellent. What would you say were the major factors that allowed Canmore to achieve the success that it has with regard to risk reduction, perhaps compared to other neighboring municipalities?
My first comment would be support from both council and administration. I think you need support from the top. And I think the other item has been the, in Alberta, we have it's called the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, FRIA, FireSmart grant program. And that grant program has provided significant grant funding for municipalities like the town of Canmore to get work completed. And we're seeing that across the province of Alberta. But in terms of Canmore's success, yeah, the funding has really helped out.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, similar to the neighbor talking to neighbor, you know, as communities, we're talking to the neighbors that that we have, you know, both the MDA Bighorn and Banff National Park and the town of Banff, and all looking at ways together that we can help reduce the risk that the greater Bow Valley faces.
So one question, fire suppression requires access to water supply if ignition occurs. Are there any special measures Canmore has taken to ensure water is available to firefighters?
Stu, did you want to talk about how you built the plan?
Sure. So a couple of key points. The town of Canmore does not have a lot of natural water systems that they can draw from. They have the Bow Valley that runs right down the middle of the valley. But to run big pumps and hose lines out of that would have to go across railroad tracks, the Trans-Canada Highway, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very difficult thing. So a lot of the emergency response planning has relied on hydrant water supply. The advantage to using the hydrants in the town of Canmore is that they come from large underground water reservoirs that are gravity fed down to the hydrant systems. So while we may lose the ability to refill those reservoirs if we lose power, we have significant volumes of water in the reservoirs on both sides of the valley. So there's a lot of reliance on hydrants and not so much of a reliance on natural water sources.
Excellent. So somebody asked a fairly technical question a bit ago, and the same person is asking a similar question. Can burned area polygons be removed from vegetation exposure assessment after a fire, ember and radiant heat? So I'm not sure. Can burned area polygons be removed from the vegetation exposure assessment after a fire?
Yes. So all of those maps just get built in ArcView, and they're using Alberta Vegetation Inventory, GIS data. And so I'm a little bit of a caveman when it comes to ArcView, but all we do is we take the base layer, which is the vegetation layer, and then I put a separate layer over top of it that is called the revised fuel mod, and I just put in any polygons that have changed since the original layer was built, and I lay them over top of the original layer. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not, but yes, changes get incorporated into each of the revised maps.
Approximately how many dwellings can be protected with the structure protection unit you have? Do you recommend that all communities with significant values at risk have SPUs?
So this one, the SPU that the town of Canmore has right now has 150 impact sprinkler heads. And if we assume that we're going to put, I'm just spitballing the number, but if we're going to put 2 or maybe 3 sprinkler heads per house, let's go with 2. That gives us the ability to protect approximately 75 homes at one time, which is a good sized neighborhood for us. And sorry, what was the follow-up question there?
Do you recommend that other communities with values at risk get SPUs?
Yes, I think it's a great idea. It kind of depends on your situation though. If you're in a grassland environment, you probably aren't going to have the time to set up sprinklers. While sprinklers are effective, it takes a little bit of time to get them set up. So grassland environments are probably not an area where you'd benefit from an SPU. But yeah, for forested communities, I think it's a great idea.
I'm going to continue this discussion because we have some really great questions coming through. There's still a dozen of them. So if it's okay with the speakers, I'd like to plot ahead. Canmore's approach has involved collaboration with Parks Canada, the province, other communities. What challenges emerge as you work to protect Canmore through collaboration?
Is that you, Kerri?
Well, I was just thinking about that, but I wonder if, Stu, maybe because you've been at the planning for Canmore a little bit longer than I have. Maybe I think generally speaking, though, we're all looking for the same outcome. So from my limited experience here in Canmore, I've only been with Canmore Fire for 3 years. So from my limited experience, there has not been a lot of challenges, but Stu has a little bit more history there.
Yeah, I think in terms of challenges from mutual aid partners in doing a fire response in the town of Canmore, I don't see any major issues. Maybe some minor issues might be the unfamiliarity of the town's layout from a mutual aid fire department. But we've kind of mitigated that by building the pre-plans, the wildfire pre-plans by zone in 11 by 17 format with a map on one side and the relevant information on the other, so that as the fire trucks roll into town, we can just start handing out maps to them and say, this is where you're going, this is who you're reporting to. So we've seen some fairly large provincial responses over the last several years in Alberta to various different communities. And structural firefighters are pretty smart dudes. They catch on pretty fast. So it doesn't seem to be much of a problem.
Great. How can you increase take-up of your offer to do FireSmart assessments on properties? How can you get better participation?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and if anybody has any ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. I think part of it is we did have a bigger plan last spring to really kind of hit the ground running early with home assessments and really increase our ability to do those. And then COVID happened, which kind of sent everything to a grounding halt. So hopefully we did figure out some ways that we can still go out and do some home assessments. So we were able to do a few of those last year. And I think this year it's really just about focusing, getting the word out, and hopefully, we're kind of relying on the people that we have done home assessments for already to encourage their neighbors to have them done as well. And I think, through the Town of Canmore's website and through social media activity, things like that, just getting the word out will hopefully encourage more people to have the assessments done.
Excellent. Now you are definitely, Canmore's an acknowledged leader in this area, but are there actions or initiatives from other communities that you would like to bring to Canmore?
I think we're open to hearing any initiatives or other activities that people are undertaking. I think the more we can share the successes, the better everyone's going to get at this.
Excellent. I believe you talked about how all hazards are considered in your planning, Kerri. How do other hazards, particularly flooding, affect your fire plan, or do they at all?
Sorry, I missed that. It was a little bit broken. Sorry.
I think at one point you talked about how all hazards are considered in your planning for Canmore. How do other hazards, and in particular flooding, affect your fire plan, or do other hazards affect it at all?
Stu, I mean, feel free to jump in here, but I think, you know, when we consider fire planning, you know, we do consider, you know, the other potentials for things, and you know, Canmore is at risk, as Stu mentioned, for steep creek flooding certain times throughout the year as well. So we always have to kind of be aware of, you know, the other potentials that exist, and take those under advisement. But Stu, you probably have a comment there too.
Sure. So that all hazards comment came from me, and what I was referring to was every municipality in Alberta must have what is called a municipal emergency management plan. And that is the all hazards plan. So the Town of Canmore's plan deals with wildfire, it deals with flood, it deals with pandemic, and based on recent actions, maybe we need to put earthquakes in there as well. But it is, so that plan is not a wildfire plan. It is just the all hazard emergency response plan that the town activates when something happens. But to go back to what that question was, it's interesting to note that the floods of 2013 and the impact of that on wildfire planning was that when we had the Steep Creek floods in 2013, it ended up giving us some massively wide fuel breaks in our steep creeks that flooded out. And so we have had some benefits from that flooding from a wildfire perspective.
Interesting. Does Canmore use or reference the International Code Council's WUI Wildland Fire Code?
I'm not aware of it. No.
No, not to my knowledge.
I know they wouldn't be able to use it because code, that's not the way codes work in Canada, but just curious if they reference it, if you reference it at all. Somebody asked if you know of any similar case studies for northern BC. So case studies of communities other than Canmore that are doing things for wildfire. I should say that over the last month or so, ICLR released Cities Adapt to Extreme Wildfire. It's a book on our website. It's available for free, and it profiles 20 case studies and actions that various towns across the country are taking to address the risk of wildfire. So you can take a look at that on our website. Actually, if you just go to citiesadapt.com, it'll take you to that book. But are either of you aware of any other interesting case studies that are similar to Canmore?
I'm not.
And I'm not really, I think the question was, did the question say Northern BC? Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not really familiar with the actions that are occurring in Northern British Columbia, although I would suggest to the person that asked the question, check out the FireSmart BC website. And I think you'd probably find all kinds of information there of what's happening in Northern British Columbia.
Right. And I just had a recent opportunity to have a demonstration of the FireSmart Hub given, and I'm quite impressed with the tool. And perhaps if it's possible to get access to the FireSmart Hub, you can see what other communities are doing.
Yeah, and I think the FireSmart Hub, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's just Alberta.
Yes, yes, but I think there's intention to try to make it national.
Okay, yeah.
Question here. I worked for the Peace River Regional District in Northeastern BC, and I'm wondering if you think it's possible to implement and enforce similar bylaws regarding buildings and fire mitigation across large regional districts or counties.
Yes, And what you might wish to do is do a little bit of Google searching on the regional district of Central Kootenay. I think they have done some significant FireSmart guidelines in their development legislation. So I would recommend check them out.
Also, we have a paper on our website. If you go under in our library under the wildfire papers, there's a paper about use of development permits, similar to Canmore's use of them. The paper references Canmore, but also other communities that are using them. So I think it'd be helpful if this attendee checked out that paper. It's free on our website. Can your system, the system you talked about before, your GIS system, be loaded into other GIS systems?
I'm a bit of a caveman, so I doubt it, but I don't know. It is, it's ArcView, and shape files can be exported to various different methods, but you're really stretching my GIS ability here.
I think this is going to be the last question. It actually is physically the last question, but also it's a two-parter. What has been the reaction of homeowners to mandatory requirements concerning WUI fire reduction? Has there been any pushback or any issues?
That's probably a good one for you, Kerri.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that. I think, I mean, there's been some pushback. Some of it comes from, having those discussions as we pointed out earlier. Some people want to, they buy their dream home here in the mountains to live amongst the forest and the trees, without, fully appreciating or understanding perhaps how those forest and trees got here, and the risk that that puts them in. So, some people you can have those conversations with, and some people you can't. And that's just, that's just the reality of it. So we have them where we can, and we educate where we can. Some people come alongside, and some people don't.
Same question for home builders, development, construction industry. Any pushback from that sector?
We have there's a group here in the Bow Valley, a builders association group, and we have been doing some work with them, and we do chat with them regularly on what we're trying to achieve with our FireSmart program. And generally speaking, the conversations have been well received, and they appreciate what we're trying to do and how we're looking at things. So, really it's about that, but it is about the continual process of conversations and networking and meeting to achieve the same goals.
Okay. I actually have one last question from attendees, and I'm going to end off with my question of my own. So here's a two-parter from an attendee. Do you have any direct contacts with the government of Alberta and AEMA and the POC in the event of a fire to maintain situational awareness with them in the event of required aid?
First question was contacts with, I'm sorry, Alberta Forestry?
Government of Alberta, Alberta Emergency Management, Provincial Operations Center, etc. Well, you mentioned before that the province forestry responds very quickly in the event of fires around Canmore. So I think kind of the answer would be yes. You do have contacts with them, and then they're there pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, so just really quickly. Alberta has currently Alberta Wildfire Management has 10 forest areas. I'm not sure where this person is from, but if they were to check which forest area they are in or near, each of those forest areas has a spot where they can log on the Alberta Wildfire website, and they get an update on all fires that are occurring in that particular forest area. So that's probably your best bet. More so probably best to do it through the Alberta Wildfire website than it is to get it through Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Unless it is a large, very complex incident, such as high level Fort McMurray. And that's where you would be dealing with the Alberta Emergency Management Agency for information.
Okay. So the second part is, do you have staff that specialize in and are familiar with Alberta government's disaster recovery programs and the municipal wildfire assistance programs? In the event of a fire, to maintain situational awareness with them in the event of required aid. Or sorry, do you have, no, sorry, I mixed those two questions up. Do you have staff that specialize in and are familiar with Alberta's disaster recovery programs and municipal wildfire assistance program?
I would say we do have, people, staff within the town of Canmore. We do have a community social service, family social service or social assistance department set up. And they do operate as part of our emergency management program here in the town. So they would be able to assist any resident that might be in need of aid or anything like that, if that answers that question. Excellent.
So I'm just going to end it off with a question for myself. What messages do you have to communities that have done very little in the face of wildfire risk, or have done nothing at all but are planning to do something about wildfire risk? What kind of messages would you have to communities like that? Tips, suggestions, places to start?
I think my suggestions would be, first of all, it is up to each community or municipality to determine whether they have a risk or not, and whether they wish to move forward or not. I think that's for each municipality to determine on their own. If a municipality is going to move forward, I think it's important that they need to, first of all, understand that FireSmart actions won't occur overnight, that it's a long-term process. And then once you get going, you need to continually maintain that process. And the last thing that I think is important for everybody is that you can't cherry pick. It's a 7 disciplines approach, and you have to use all of those 7 disciplines in order to be most effective in working towards a FireSmart community.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, it's not, it can look really daunting from the outside, and if you don't have any measures in place, it can be a lot to look at, and oh my goodness, where do we start, right? But I think the important thing to remember is that starting somewhere is better than starting nowhere. It's the small steps can be taken, and as Stu says, over time, small steps lead to big steps. So, just as long as you start somewhere, you're going to be a little bit further ahead.
I think that's sage advice. Thank you both. This was an excellent session. I think the attendees should note that we put this together very quickly after we lost our original planned speaker. So thanks so much to both of you. This was really, really rich and outstanding. Greatly appreciated. Several people have asked whether they will have access to the recording and or the slides, and the answer is yes. By early next week, we will have a recording of the session on our YouTube channel, and the slides will be located on our page under the workshops section. Mark your calendars. The next Friday forum is March 19th. It'll be on flooding. Keep an eye on your inboxes for the flyer for that event. Thank you for attending, and thank you again to both of the speakers. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.